Hello, everyone. As we are all trickling in here, if you could put in the chat where you're tuning in from and maybe what your local watershed is. We'd love to see where you're from. And we'll get started in about a minute or two. Hello, everyone. We'll get started in about 1 minute. While we're waiting, if you could type in the chat where you're tuning in from and maybe what watershed you're in. We'd love to hear where you are tuning in from. Awesome. Lots of different states: South Dakota, Maryland, Wisconsin, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Jersey, lots of places. So let's go ahead and get started today. So my name is Abby Hileman, and I'm the Salt Watch Coordinator here at the Izaak Walton League of America, which is one of the oldest conservation organizations here in the United States. As we're going through this webinar today, please feel free to use the chat. Also, if you have questions, use the Q&A, which should be enabled, or if you can't find that, you're more than welcome to throw some questions in the chat. I'll try to answer them as we're going, but if not, we'll hold questions until the end. So today we're going to talk about the Salt Watch Winter Roundup. We're not going to go through all of the data from the year because we're still collecting data. Salt Watch is a year-round community science monitoring program, but we will be talking about some of the things that happened this past winter. So for those of you who are new to Salt Watch, or maybe you've been a Salt Watcher for quite some time, here are some of our goals. We want to raise awareness in the general public about the connection between salt and stream health, to identify chloride hotspots in fresh water, and to advocate for smarter salting practices as well. And I will be using the terms chloride and salt interchangeably today because chloride is a main component of salt. What is road salt or winter salt? There's a number of different ones that we commonly use. Sodium chloride is the most commonly used road salt out there, and it's also the least expensive. But we also use things like potassium chloride, and then magnesium chloride and calcium chloride. And usually magnesium and calcium chloride are used sort of at lower temperatures. And sometimes there's a mixture of all of these salts maybe in one bag that we're buying as well. And there's a couple different ways that salt is actually applied. So there's rock salt, like that photo there on the left of the truck. And rock salt is this really sort of more granular salt that's being applied. It's sort of the chunks of salt that a lot of trucks are applying. There are some downsides to applying rock salt. One, it's very highly concentrated. It's that chunk of salt, so it's all completely salt. And a lot of times it does tend to sort of bounce off of roadways as it's being applied, or as cars are driving by, or maybe people are kicking it off of the sidewalks. And then there's also brine application. Brine application is sort of a newer technology, but it's one way that a lot of departments of transportation are actually reducing the amount of salt that they're using on the roadways. And that's because it's a salt water mixture. So anytime you're seeing those lines sprayed on the roads, like the photo there on the right, you know that your Department of Transportation or local municipality, they're trying to reduce the amount of salt being applied. The brine application creates a layer between sort of the surface of the roadway and any precipitation coming down. And it also sticks to the roadway, so it doesn't have issues of sort of getting kicked off by pedestrians or thrown off as vehicles are driving by as well. And it's something that applicators can actually apply up to 48 hours in advance of a winter storm. And so it saves them a lot of time and money as well. And I did want to show some sort of more commonly seen salt applications, like that photo there on the left of just really all of that salt. There's so much salt there, but that's sort of a common occurrence where we can sort of see all the salt visually and feel that crunch underfoot. Whereas the photo there on the right is actually how much salt we should be seeing during some of these salt applications. You really shouldn't feel that crunch underfoot. And a little bit of salt really goes a long way as well. For instance, it only takes 1 teaspoon of salt to permanently pollute 5 gallons of water. It's really not feasible to remove salt from the environment once it's released into the environment. And so just a little bit of salt goes a really long way to keep us safe in the wintertime and also sort of reduce that environmental pollution as well. A 50-pound bag of salt, which is what you typically get at the store, it actually can pollute up to 10,000 gallons of water, which is about the size of a residential swimming pool. And there are a lot of impacts that this salt has to wildlife, infrastructure, drinking water, habitat, and our pets as well. We're going to go through some of these today. So wildlife impacts, it really does affect fish, any of those organisms living in those fresh waterways. They're not used to salty water. They're used to living in fresh water. And so some of those organisms, especially the little tiny ones, they might be really sensitive, even maybe more sensitive than some of those bigger organisms like fish. Vernal pools, which are sort of depressions that become waterways due to seasonal snow melt or sort of ice thaw, they don't have any discharge point, so there's no way for that water to escape except for really evaporation and sort of uptake by plants that might be in the area. And so a lot of organisms that are really sensitive, like amphibians, they might reproduce in those vernal pools, and they're very sensitive to things, especially like salt. And so that can be a really big problem as well. And then some fish that are migratory, we don't really think about migratory fish a lot, but some fish, they might be migrating from the ocean into fresh waterways to reproduce. And unfortunately, a lot of them might not be able to find some of the spawning ground due to elevated salinity. And Erin, who will be talking after me, she's going to talk a little bit about that in her presentation too. So I'm really looking forward to learning more. There's a lot of infrastructure impacts too. So chloride is really, really corrosive. Sort of a low estimate that's been put out there is it costs the US between $16 to $19 billion annually in damages. And it has a lot of impacts to things like pavement, roadways, bridges, concrete, cars, culverts, pipes, appliances, and so much more as well. There's also a number of drinking water impacts. So water itself is incredibly corrosive, and chloride added to that water makes it even more corrosive. And this can become a really big problem because things like chloride is not typically removed at wastewater treatment facilities. So as that ice and snow and salt is sort of disappearing during the winter time due to all of that snow melt and rainfall, a lot of that salt's going into our local waterways and can end up in our drinking water as a result. And this can be a really big problem for people who especially are on like low sodium diets, because they might not be realizing that they're getting additional sodium in their drinking water. And the reason I mentioned sodium here is because sodium chloride is that most commonly used road salt. And so that sodium also is not being removed from that drinking water, and can be really problematic down the line. And contaminated water, contaminated with salt, can also not be used for dialysis treatment. So people who are having some kidney issues and need help sort of filtering out their blood and everything, they can't use that water either. And there's a really big concern of sort of that additional corrosivity from the chloride, sort of corroding some pipes, especially on older infrastructure where maybe lead and copper pipes are still prevalent, to that leading to heavy metals in drinking water. Such an occurrence actually happened starting in 2014 in Flint, Michigan, the Flint water crisis. One component of that was actually because of road salt pollution. So something that is real life that could happen. And then also, if you're on a well, if that's where your drinking water comes from, that's not something that's regulated by the federal government. And so you're responsible for doing your own testing in that case. And so people who are on well water, road salt pollution can become a pretty big concern as well. There's also a lot of habitat impacts. I'm listing lots of things about plants here. So plants can really just dry out. They can desiccate, dry out, and die as a result of especially things like overspraying or salt getting kicked off of sidewalks or sort of thrown off of roadways. So that's where some of these plants are especially most at risk. But also if we're creating additional like stormwater infrastructure with rain gardens and things as well, those plants aren't used to that salty water. And aquatic plants too can be at risk, similar to our freshwater organisms. They're not used to that salty water. And then the soils in a lot of these habitats, they're less likely to retain water and become more compacted too, leading to a lot of issues. And then something that is sort of being more studied right now is how chloride can actually mobilize a lot of heavy metals in the environment too. And so that can create additional problems down the road as well. And then of course our pets. A lot of people are concerned about their pets during the winter time. What can we do as we're walking around? Because they're maybe not wearing boots like we are, some pets are, but if pets eat salt, sometimes they can get poisoned from that salt because it's so concentrated, can lead to things like dehydration and then some different types of skin irritation, paw and skin irritation, dryness, cuts and burns. So lots of problems for our pets as well. What can we do about this? So I know it's not winter time right now, so this is kind of a weird time to be talking about salt, but salt is a year-round problem. It doesn't go away. So some things that we can do at home during the winter time, and we'll remind you about this again throughout the year and especially sort of more towards the fall, shoveling early and often, clearing those walkways before that snow turns to ice. Scattering salt, a 12-ounce mug, your typical coffee mug, actually holds enough salt to treat a 20-foot long driveway or 10 sidewalk squares, which is about 2 parking spaces. And then you can sweep up excess salt and reuse it, store it in a closed container and use it during the next storm event as well, which is something a lot of people don't think about. So more things that you can do. Another thing you can do is test for road salt pollution in your local surface waters or in your tap water. And the way you can do this is requesting a Salt Watch kit. You can go to www.saltwatch.org to request your kit. We'll mail it directly to whatever address you put in. And each kit includes 4 test strips to test for chloride. Instructions for how to take the sample, instructions for how to submit that data to our online database, the Clean Water Hub. And then there's also a conversion chart to convert sort of the units that are on those chloride strips into chloride or parts per million. Some things that we've been doing that you can also take to your community are some of the things listed here. So recently we've been going sort of door to door to local businesses to really learn about what their salting practices have been, what happened this past winter during some of those storm events. And then also trying to find out who some of these applicators are in our local community, because we actually host trainings later in the year as well. And trying to give them some resources to save money, save time, but also maintain safety, since a lot of businesses are really concerned about liability. They don't want people to slip and fall and sue them. So starting these conversations is really, really important, because nobody really talks about salt. So we all need to do our part with that. We also table at farmers markets throughout our county, lots of different farmers markets, just to start the conversation and give resources to people who need it. And then we also offer smart salt applicator training to applicators who are concerned about the environment and want to save money while still maintaining that safety. And there are some online trainings throughout the year that usually are free. You can check out Wisconsin Saltwise and then also Minnesota Pollution Control. They typically have calendars of some trainings that happen throughout the year. And it's really great to learn more on some of those trainings. And then we're part of a couple different regional outreach work groups in our local region as well. And the purpose of these outreach work groups are to really sort of learn more about what some of these other groups are doing and team up and have some of the same messaging throughout the region. So one thing that we did this past year is everyone was sort of giving out cups that had some of the same messaging on it of shovel, scatter, sweep. And then these cups were also 12 ounces, so people could use those cups to scatter salt over those 20-foot long driveways or 10 sidewalk squares as well. Other things that you can do in your community, we have an advocacy guide that's available on our website. You can scan with your phone the QR code, or you can visit saltwatch.org and go to the What You Can Do page. The advocacy guide goes through sort of some conversation starters to really just start the conversation about road salt, and also different ways to learn more about your departments of transportation, maybe some local applicators, how to start the conversation with condo and HOAs and business owners, all of these different people. And then there's additionally some letters to the editor and letters to legislators as well that you can use. So just sort of, if you want to start that conversation, that's where all of this starts, is having these talks with people and learning what's really happening out there in our local community. And if there's Spanish speakers in your neighborhood, or if you are a Spanish speaker, we do have resources in Spanish as well. And we're sort of bringing out more and more resources throughout the year in Spanish, trying to get this message to all of these different groups of people, because the more we all know, the better we can all do. And I did want to put in a quick plug as well. We do have an upcoming webinar on June 25th. Of this year. It'll start at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central Time. This is about our Paint the Plow event that we had this past fall. It is sort of targeted towards our chapters, our Izaak Walton League chapters, but anyone can attend this event. This is really for anyone who's interested in using sort of Department of Transportation snowplows as big billboards about smart salting. So really excited for this, and we'll have sort of more advertisements about this event in the future as well. So June 25th, mark your calendars. And I did want to go over some of our results really quickly before I pass it over to Erin. So we have broken a record. We're at over 20,000 data points since SaltWatch started in 2018. So really excited about that. So since the program began in 2018, 20,302 data points. The map that you see there on the left, the larger the dot, the more samples have been taken in that location. And then the color of the dot corresponds to what sort of concentration of chloride was measured at that site. So 28% of the samples we considered to be excellent. They are actually below the range of our test strips, so between 0 and 30 parts per million. 39% of the samples that we've received since the beginning of our program we considered to be good. They were between 30 to 100 parts per million. 100 parts per million is what is sort of considered to be the upper range of what would be naturally occurring within the environment, although some areas of freshwater waterways are much less than 100 parts per million. 19% of the samples were sort of above that 100 parts per million, but below 230 parts per million, which is considered to be toxic to a lot of freshwater aquatic life. And then 14% of the samples that we received were considered to be toxic, so at or above 230 parts per million. The results from this year, starting July 1st until I believe it was Monday, 5,367 data points were actually ahead of last year, which we're really excited about. So this will be hopefully the biggest saltwatch season to date. 23% of the samples we've received are excellent, between 0 and 30 parts per million. 48% of the samples are good, between 30 and 100 parts per million. 17% of the samples are poor, between 100 and 230 parts per million. And 12% of those samples came back as toxic, so above that 230 parts per million threshold. And what we're going to do right now, before I pass it over to Erin, is just sort of zoom in, not with numbers, but sort of just look at some of the visuals of some of these areas that especially had more data points this past year. So Iowa, lots of data points, Story County and Ames, Iowa, especially lots of green in that area. The Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul and Minnesota, some green, but also quite a bit of red, especially in sort of the more urban areas. Wisconsin, lots of red around Appleton. And the reason I'm pointing out some of this red is especially impervious surfaces, those areas that like concrete and pavement that don't really allow water to permeate through, especially in northern climates, they have a tendency to have higher chloride concentrations. That's why we're seeing a lot of that red. Cleveland and Detroit. Cleveland, by the way, is one of the top sort of producer exporter of salt that we use for road salt in the United States. There's a couple different locations throughout the US, but Cleveland's one of those big hubs of salt mining. The DC metro region, and this is sort of where we're located in Montgomery County, which is right above Washington, DC, that sort of diamond in the middle of the screen. And then Philadelphia and New Jersey. So lots of data points sort of all throughout New Jersey, which we love to see. But unfortunately, a lot of red throughout Philly and New Jersey. So we know that right now it's not winter time, but when it does become winter, please salt responsibly. Also, if you need a test kit, please go to saltwatch.org to request your test kit. If you need more than one test kit, if you're with a group or maybe school students, things like that, please feel free to email us at saltwatch@iwla.org to request that kit. And without further ado, I'm going to actually pass it over to Erin Stretz, who wears many hats and does many different things. So she is with the Watershed Institute and also New Jersey Watershed Watch. So we're going to do sort of a focus here on New Jersey, which we're really excited about, and learning more about some of the partnerships you have as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby. So I'm going to share my entire screen. Actually, oh, there we go. Now it's working. Wouldn't you know it? So can you see that, the full screen, or is it still funky?
Still a little funky.
Oh, dang. Okay. Sorry, guys. I will be sharing my whole screen. Technical difficulties. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun to get to watch this program expand all across the country. And I know that we're so happy to have it in New Jersey. And it's really taken off. So we appreciate the work that Izaak Walton League has done that has really led New Jersey to this point. So I'm going to talk about the data that we've collected and some of the things that we're doing with that data. But first, I want to give you some background just into who I am and where I'm from. I am from the Watershed Institute. That's the organization where I work. And the program that I run at the Watershed Institute is called the New Jersey Watershed Watch Network. And then the project we're talking about today is New Jersey Salt Watch. So I wanted to kind of outline that since I'll be using these terms, throughout the presentation. So the Watershed Institute is located in central New Jersey. We have a focus on the Millstone watershed and the adjacent part of the Delaware River watershed. And we are a LEED Platinum facility. We have about 35 or so staff that work across 4 basic sectors, all kind of working toward protecting and restoring the waters and natural environment of central New Jersey. We do this through education and advocacy. With education, we have summer camps and educational programs, school groups and things. But with advocacy, we go out, we take the information that we have, the science that we've collected, and we try to work towards a goal, mainly with municipalities, but also statewide. Our conservation team works on our property. We have about 1,000 acres. And so we're preserving that land and removing invasives and doing studies on our property as well. I work in the science department, so I'm the assistant director of science. And one of our programs, of course, is New Jersey Watershed Watch Network. So this we founded back in 2018, and this is completely funded by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. But it's totally ran by our nonprofit, the Watershed Institute. So we definitely collaborate towards basically the primary objective, which is to increase the volume of high quality data that's being collected across the state of New Jersey. We want to be able to supplement agency data to better understand what's going on throughout the state and to kind of beef up our regulatory assessments as well, while also providing data for the groups themselves to do to do whatever they will with it. So we have about 55 or so groups spread across the state. Of course, that number is always fluctuating as new groups are coming in and groups are leaving. So with New Jersey Watershed Watch Network, why are we focusing on winter salt in the first place? Well, in New Jersey specifically, we have seen chloride concentrations triple since 1997. So this is definitely an issue that is becoming more and more important to address. And we want to make sure that we're fixing this before we kind of go over this threshold that we can't come back from. So Abby mentioned, what is it? A teaspoon is enough to contaminate, so many gallons of water. When we talk about fresh water, we're talking like that is what is the defining feature of fresh water. It's salt. So when we're adding salt into fresh water, it's not fresh anymore. And so everything that we need to do with water is impacted as a result. So we wanted to get a better understanding of salt, road salt use, winter salt in New Jersey. We launched this program, of course, based off of Izaak Walton League's program, the Salt Watch program. So we're using the same protocols. We kind of have adapted it a little bit differently, though, which I'll talk about. And I don't know if you remember back in December 2020, but there wasn't a whole lot of monitoring going on. So what we wanted to do to keep people engaged in this work is we wanted to keep things real simple. We needed to keep it accessible from anywhere across the state. So being able to mail out the test strips really invited so many new people into this. And then this is also cost effective, or it once was before Hawk doubled the prices on us over the past few years. But it was cost effective at one point. And it's just an easy way for people to get involved. And so what do we get out of that? We get a lot more coverage of chloride data across the state. And we also get this data during critical periods when salt is being applied to the roads. There's no guarantee necessarily that the DEP monitoring staff are going to get to a site at the time when it's the worst, when the chloride is the highest. But when you have a team of volunteers spread all over the state, people are much more able to kind of react to situations. And we were able to have some folks kind of go out right before a storm and right after a storm so we could measure the impact of an individual storm. And of course, with the people participating, they kind of get a sense of ownership over the site that they're monitoring. They're more aware of the issues of road salt. And I think after people become volunteers in this program, you start looking around and you see all the salt piles left behind after a winter storm. And it just makes people, I don't want to say livid, but sometimes. And so that really will help people to kind of move forward and make changes. So with our system in New Jersey, we did not use the Clean Water Hub system for our first 3 years, from starting in 2020 to go to 2023. Instead, we had used a Survey 123 form, so we were able to collect some different kind of sets of data on weather observations, recent precipitation, if salt had been recently applied, and also with each visit, the volunteers would drop a pin on their location. And so what we have is in an area, maybe 100 meters stretch of a stream, we've got all of these data points because we had to create the sites basically after the fact. So we're just dropping pins. Even if you go to the same site 6 times, the coordinates are going to be slightly different each time, So we had to kind of go in after the fact to create these sites. And how I did it was kind of looking at sites, the data that was collected within about 30 meters. So you can see in this top box, those are all considered one site because they are within 30 meters. Then we placed the coordinates at the furthest downstream kind of point of that segment. And then if there were tributaries coming in, so in this example, we've got a tributary coming in here, so that equals a new site, another tributary coming in, so that's a new site, even though they're within that 30 meters. So we're trying to kind of form our data into what the Clean Water Hub allows you to do up front, which is to create those sites. So that was a good feature for sure. So over time, we have seen the activity in New Jersey Salt Watch basically double across all of these different parameters. So for data points, that first year, we had about 400. Then in this last year, we had just over 1,000, I think 1,025 data points. Our number of sites has increased from about 125 to about 240 or so. And the number of contributors has increased to 150 people. And so with contributors there, what we're counting is individuals submitting data. But what we're hearing from people is that the impact of this definitely goes beyond the number of people who are just typing the data in. Since there's environmental commissions going out, I think someone here is from Sparta Township, I saw in the chat. And so when someone goes out, they bring their community, they bring their family, they bring a class. And so we've really seen the impact of this really expand across the state. And so when we're looking at the state spatially, the activity, it is sort of concentrated towards the northern half of the state. That could be because it's more populous and we just have a lot more activity going on there in terms of like environmental organizations that are active. But it's also that tends to be where we get more of the snow. It's kind of a high gradient Piedmont area up there, and south is more coastal plain and probably get less snow. But each of these sites, that circle, the size of it corresponds to how many readings we received. On average, for this 3-year period we're looking at from 2020 to 2023, we had an average of 5.2 data points per site. And so over time, we did see this program expand. Of course, in that first year, December 2020, it took a minute for this program to take off. But we did see some sites concentrated around the area that the Watershed Institute is located in central New Jersey. So you do see a hub of activity there. And we also had Clean Ocean Action, another group on the coast. They were focused on freshwater lakes. We made sure that they were doing that. But they really helped us to kind of spread this program out a little bit and take this program to other organizations who could then distribute their own test strips to their own volunteers. So in the second year, we saw this trend continue when the Musconetcong Watershed Association started monitoring along the stretch of the Musconetcong River, which is basically a straight line down, as you can see. And then in the third year, we got tons of participation up in the Paul and Skill watershed from the Food Shed Alliance. So we've seen this program definitely grow over the years. Now let's take a look at what we have been finding. What does the data say? So we'll look at these standards. This, as Abby mentioned, we kind of 50 to 100 is kind of like the suggested threshold for, ambient, untouched, pristine northeastern waters. 150, somewhere around there. And so when I created this assessment, I created a 5-point assessment where less than 50, we would consider that low, and that covers all of the values we're getting that are below that lower limit of the test strip, which is about 24 to 30, depending on the lot you have. And then at 230 ppms, that's the New Jersey DEP's chronic standard for chloride. There's another acute standard at 860 ppm. But since our test strips are not able to measure up to that level, we just created that next kind of threshold of impairment at 650, which is the upper limit of the test strip. So anything above that was considered extremely high. Now, elevated or vulnerable is that space between 100 ppm and 230. And this is where, we're kind of becoming elevated. We have a chance to kind of turn this around a little bit. So that's why I wanted to highlight those spots as well. Now, DEP, they kind of do a 2-point assessment. Is it impaired or is it not impaired? And this is a bit of a simplification of how DEP does this assessment. But we do have that threshold at 230 ppm. And depending on, how we have to have a standard base flow. It can't be very, very low flow, because then you have chloride concentrations that increase. So kind of at standard flow, we want to see this at least 2 exceedances of that chronic standard over a period of at least 7 days. Whereas the acute standard, if you exceed that one time, then it would be considered impaired. So looking at New Jersey Salt Watch data from 2020 to 23, you can see that most of the data coming in was in that lower range. We had a good deal of data below 100 ppm. It was about 11%, I think, that were either high or extremely high, where we would consider that impaired. And this is how that looks spatially, again, with the number of readings corresponding to the size of that dot. And so we can definitely see some trends up here. If you can see my cursor, I'm over in the northeast, the Lake Hopatcong. We see kind of a hot spot there, and we see a trend, a decreasing trend, as the Musconetcong flows toward the Delaware River. We also see some elevations just kind of scattered around Trenton, which is a very impervious area. Also around Camden, which again is a very urbanized area. And then, of course, in the New York metro area, we're seeing some exceedances as well. Now, when we look at this data in comparison to snowfall totals, we definitely see a trend here. The snowfall is that's that pink bar on the secondary x-axis. So in the first year, we had 35 inches of snow, which is on average, which is pretty high for New Jersey. I think on average, we usually get about 16 inches. So that second year was a nice kind of normal, quote unquote, snowfall year. And then in that third year, we only had on average about 2 inches of snowfall. So we had 3 totally different kind of snow conditions to be able to compare our results. And what we can see in this box plot, that blue area, that's the middle 50% of the data. That line in the middle, that shows the median, and then the X is going to show the mean. So what we're seeing is that mean from the first year basically is cut in half in the third year. So we have 168 ppm on average, the mean in that first year, 83 in that last year. And so we can see the kind of range of measurements decreases as the snowfall levels decrease, which tells me that when we have lots of snowfall, we have lots of salt being applied to the road, of course. And so we have a lot more of those peaks that are drawing that mean up, even though the median is kind of staying relatively the same across all of those years. So that was an interesting thing that we saw, and we were kind of lucky to capture those variations in snowfall. Looking at this monthly, this is an average of just each month what the average snowfall was. And we can definitely see a trend again where the median chloride does vary. Of course, when we have winter snow, we have salt being applied, we see that median chloride rise basically from December to April. But the exceedances, so these very high points that are above 230, is very much in line with how much snowfall we're receiving monthly. So what I'm seeing here are those peaks, those high exceedances are increasing. They peak in February. That's when we have the most snowfall. In March, the snowfall really, really drops. The number of exceedances kind of drops in March down to April, but we're still seeing elevated median chloride into March and April, even though there's no snow. So what we're seeing here is that chloride being held in the soil and being released slowly, or it could go down into groundwater, which then releases out into surface water. And so we're not going to see, well, we may see these instantaneous impacts to chloride concentrations, but we're going to see that elevation continue for a while. We'd love to be able to expand this program into the summer months, like Izaak Walton is doing right now. It's kind of a resource issue, right? But we would love to see how these values change as we get really low flow conditions in the summertime. Those concentrations are probably going to come right back up. Now, looking at the weather conditions, specifically when each sample was collected, we had people differentiate between snow melt, rain, and then dry. There were also some NAs, I think 196 NAs, where people just didn't write it in. But these are listed in order of their relative impact to chloride concentration. Of course, snow has the highest impact on chloride because that's when the salt is being applied to the road. And then you've got that initial runoff and that scatter of the actual rock salt into storm sewers or directly into the water. And then snow melt, of course, that's making that salt mobile and moving it right into your streams. Rain is, again, rinsing it away, and then dry. That's just our baseline. So when we're looking at the mean chloride across all of these different conditions, we definitely see elevations in snow conditions, in snow melt, and in rain. I did some statistical analyses here, and there really wasn't significant statistical variation between snow melt, and rain, even though the mean chloride shows that there's quite a big difference. But those three were very statistically significantly different than all the dry conditions. So I think what we need to do here in terms of kind of how we're doing this assessment is I'd love to get a little bit more specific and ask people about inches of precipitation, whether instead of just saying, did it rain or did it not? Because that can kind of help us to figure out these numbers and try to make these connections a little bit more clear. But we're definitely seeing a connection between chloride and snow. So what are we doing with this information? Well, the integrated report is something that the New Jersey DEP puts out every 2 years. This is a report that's required by the Clean Water Act. They deliver this report to EPA. It's called the integrated report because it's combining these two sections, 305B and 303D. But basically what we're looking at here is a comprehensive assessment of water quality within a state, and then specifically a listing of all the impaired waters in the state. So what do we do with the integrated report information? Those impaired waters are identified for remediation. So the example I've put here is the total maximum daily load, or TMDL. This is basically a plan to reduce inputs into a water body. So if we were to find an area that is impaired for chloride, we can institute a TMDL and try to reduce those chloride inputs. And then hopefully over time, we will see that water quality improve. On the other side of the scale, high quality waters are identified, and then we want to put anti-degradation protection on those waters, things like wider riparian buffers or reduced discharges to the water, because we want to keep those high quality waters clean. And the whole goal of the Clean Water Act, of course, is to keep our waters fishable, swimmable, and drinkable. Now in New Jersey, we do the integrated report assessment based on a Huck 14 subwatershed. So on average, this is kind of the smallest unit that we'll look at with subwatersheds. On average, it's about 5,000 acres, and there's 958 Huck 14s throughout the state. The ones shaded in blue are the ones where we were able to collect data. So that was 200. And of those 200, we were able to make kind of firm assessments for 96 of them. And these are the areas where we had more than 8 data points. Anything less than that, we would consider insufficient data. So that's why we see kind of the transparency vary with the number of readings. It's totally opaque if we have 20 readings or more, and it kind of gets lower and lower. And then we see the hatch marks on those sites that have less than 8 points. So that's kind of what's going on here. And that matches what DEP uses in their methods when they're doing their own integrated report. So looking at these 96 Huck 14 subwatersheds, we found 44% of them were impaired using New Jersey Salt Watch data. Now, looking at New Jersey DEP's assessment of the same 96 watersheds, they found only 1%, or I think it's 5, Huck 14s that were impaired. So why does this matter? I'm not sure that that this is, either way, we're not collecting enough data. We're not making this assessment on a scale that I think is helpful to actually address this problem. We've got 31% of those Huck 14s that have insufficient data according to DEP. So why not try to fill in that gap with people who are already out there and doing the work? So we can help to target DEP's monitoring work as well. And so what we've done here is we're looking at, on the right-hand side, this is a map of the watersheds, the subwatersheds that DEP finds impaired for chloride in the red. And on the left, this is a look at the New Jersey Salt Watch assessments. We can see that dark red are those existing impairments, but the kind of hot pink color are the new impairments, the ones that New Jersey Salt Watch found to be impaired. And so it's in those subwatersheds, maybe those that are also vulnerable in the purple, that maybe we can kind of target DEP's monitoring efforts so we can capture the conditions more accurately. Another way that we can use this data is through watershed advocacy. So sharing the data that we're collecting with the groups on the ground so that they can do what they need to do with it. Looking at this map, we can see, of course, the Musconetcong River. That's that straight line down. We had tons of data collected in this area, so we were able to make a pretty good assessment. And what we found, as I mentioned before, is that the concentrations were much higher in the upper part of this watershed at Lake Hopatcong. That's kind of in that dark brown area, and then it just kind of decreases as it moves and towards the Delaware River. And gets kind of low, and it's kind of a comfortable condition in that moderate chloride concentration area. So this is an example where we can share this information with these groups that are active in this area. So the Musconetcong watershed, they focus on that whole stretch, the whole Musconetcong River, but there's two groups who focus specifically on Lake Hopatcong as well. And so there's a lot of folks up there who can take this data and then apply it locally to try to change some behavior, try to reduce the salt use, and try to implement some best management practices. So speaking of local best management practices, municipalities are, of course, a big applier of road salt. And so it's really helpful to look at this information on the municipal level. So we're able to share that directly with a town to tell them, hey, you've got pretty high chloride, and this is exactly what we found. And so we've created a map. The link I'll share on the last slide if anyone wants to look at it more closely, but just kind of giving the basic information about a site or about a municipality. And then if, we didn't get a ton of information, in this example in Hillsborough, there's only 2 measurements. That's not enough to make an assessment for a whole municipality. And so we've marked that as insufficient. But the areas where we have insufficient data, or even those where we do have data, there is an application of this data in the Sustainable Jersey program. So Sustainable Jersey is a free and voluntary program. It's a certification program for municipalities to sign up, start implementing what they call actions toward things like water quality, climate, energy, health and wellness, et cetera, anything related to kind of sustainability and wellness. So why would a municipality participate in this program? Well, they can kind of open up opportunities for grant funding so that they can implement some of these BMPs. They get guidance and tools from the folks that run Sustainable Jersey. And also the BMPs will help to save them money. So of course, that's kind of a hard line thing that everyone can agree on. We want to save money. And so the partnership that we've developed with Sustainable Jersey is that if a municipality participates in SaltWatch and then shares the data out with their community, they get 5 points toward a certification and toward what they're calling a gold star in water specifically. So New Jersey Salt Watch is a tool that municipalities can use to learn about what's going on in their own town, to share what's going on in their own town with their constituents, and then to take it to the next level and kind of inventory how much road salt they're using. Look at their salt application rates, start brining instead of applying rock salt, et cetera, all of these best management practices that they can then implement after learning, of course, about the condition of their waters. And this is important because municipalities have a lot of control over the land cover within their area, of course. This is a graph that shows Huck 14 sub-watersheds. Each one is shown twice here. Once plotted with the percent of forested land within a Huck 14, that's the green points. And once plotted with the red dot, that's the percent developed land within the Huck 14. And this is plotted along with chloride concentrations, and we can definitely see a relationship between imperviousness and chloride concentration, as Abby mentioned. Of course, this relationship is restricted a bit because we have a limitation with the test strips. We can only measure down to about 24 to 30. So there's a whole kind of row of data that's going to kind of throw off our relationship. But still, I think it's pretty clear that we're seeing an impact on chloride based on land cover. And so what we're seeing, what I kind of saw visually, was a threshold showing up at about 40% land use. And that this applies to 40% forest or to 40% development. Basically, if you've got 40% of forested land or more, you didn't really have exceedances of the 230 ppm chloride. Conversely, if you have more than 40% of developed land, pretty likely that you're going to have those very high readings. Now, what we saw were some exceptions to the rule. So some areas, some sub watersheds, some municipalities that had more forest, so they should have had lower levels, or we had areas that were very impervious, but they had lower levels, and we would expect higher levels. And so it's in these spots that we can start to work with those municipalities and say, what are you doing differently? Is this in relation to your road salt application rate or something else? What are you doing to actually make that direct impact on chloride levels? And so gathering the municipal road salt application data is a huge priority for me. I would love it not to be an intern making a phone call to 500 plus municipalities, but if that's how it needs to be, then so be it. But that would be really helpful to just measure exactly how much salt's going on the ground, how much is going in the water, and then what happens to the rest of it. Another thing that I would love to be able to do, or others who are working with this data could do as well, is overlaying the chloride data with maps of the storm sewer outflows and also with wastewater treatment outfalls. And so we can kind of measure, weigh the inputs of chloride coming from the road, from road salts, from the storm sewer, or from wastewater, because as Abby mentioned, that chloride is not being removed in traditional wastewater treatment. Water softeners are the most common source of chloride to wastewater specifically. Road salt is to surface waters. So that's where we have those outfalls. That's also going to impact our chloride levels. As municipalities are starting to implement more BMPs or putting in green infrastructure to help manage their stormwater, this is another thing I'd love to be able to track, plot where these things are happening, and see if chloride concentrations are changing over time. And as I mentioned, of course, we'd love to be able to expand this annually or year-round, as Izaak Walton has. So this would definitely add, I think, to our data set. So that is the website. If anyone wants to look at the ArcGIS story map, you can head to njwatershedwatch.org/saltwatch and hit that link.
Erin, we had one question, and that was, do you know what methodology DEP is using to collect their chloride data?
I don't know. No, but they also they collect conductivity data as well. So they're doing that with tends to be continuous sensors that are really valuable for that. And there is some effort in New Jersey to kind of draw connections between conductivity data through these continuous sensors and chloride, which is generally, it's a discrete sample. You go out, you have to drive there, you have to take the bottle and collect that sample continuously. It just always collects. So wouldn't it be great if we could draw that relationship between chloride and conductivity so that we wouldn't have to drive around all across the state? We can just have the sensors reporting that data back to us. I'm not sure about their chloride method.
If anyone else has some questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A or in the chat. I know there's one question about how many tons of salt are put down each year in Montgomery County, Maryland. I think I have that data. Frank, I can get that to you through an email after the webinar. There was a bill that we tried to sort of help get through in Maryland this year, which would have required municipalities, state agencies, and counties to report the amount of salt that they sort of have at the beginning of the year, and then how much they apply sort of throughout the year. But unfortunately, that did not go through. So we'll work on something like that again this next session.
Yeah, we don't have that in New Jersey either. I would love to see that, of course. What we did implement earlier this year was municipalities have to go back after the storm and sweep up all of the excess salt from the road. So that's, we were kind of worried about implementation of that because how are we going to just go around? What's a pile that's big enough that you need to clean up, and all of these kind of things. So we're working it out, taking baby steps in New Jersey.
Every little bit helps.
Yes.
Perfect. I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat. If you do have questions, feel free to email myself or Erin. And we thank you all for coming to this presentation. And Erin, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge about New Jersey and your partnerships and all of the great work that you're doing.
Thank you, Abby. Well, you guys laid the groundwork for us, so thanks for kicking it off.
Well, I hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you all again for attending. And again, this webinar has been recorded. So if you want to rewatch any little bit or maybe the whole thing, feel free to go to our YouTube channel and it'll be up there in the coming days. So thank you all so much. And I hope you have a great evening. And Erin, again, thank you.
Bye.